Good afternoon. My name is Michael Suplee, and I'm in the Water Quality Standards and Modeling section at the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. This afternoon, I'd like to talk to you about nutrients and excess algal biomass. What are we talking about when we're talking about excess algal growth in western Montana rivers and streams? We're talking about situations that look like what you're seeing on the screen. Because our rivers in Montana are generally open canopied and shallow in the summer, usually less than a half a meter or a meter deep throughout the summer. The most common manifestation, if there is excessive nitrogen and phosphorus levels in these streams, is long filamentous algae attached to the bottom, as shown here. Now, this algae can be quantified by different levels of chlorophyll A per square meter of stream bottom. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a photograph of a stream with low algae. That's 40 milligrams chlorophyll A per square meter with approximately 5% bottom cover. In the middle, a more mid-range concentration with 120 milligrams chlorophyll A per square meter or 30% bottom cover. And then in the lower right, we see a high amount of algae growth, 300 milligrams chlorophyll A per square meter with 60% cover or more. Now, these levels of algae are known to have different effects on different aquatic life and recreational uses in these streams. So, for example, recreation is considered acceptable to the public at levels of 150 milligrams square meter algae or lower, but not above that. Regarding salmonids, what we see is increasing growth and survival of salmonids as algae levels increase from zero due to further availability of food. As we get into the 150 or so milligram per square meter range, depending on the literature you read, salmonid growth and survival is high or possibly beginning to get reduced. And then as we get out to these high levels, we start to see reduced survival very likely. Dissolved oxygen, we see very few problems or no problems at all at low levels of algae. As you go around in this 150 milligram per square meter range, we start to see sporadic problems. And then here, when algae levels are high, we see DO problems occurring very commonly, either nightly or episodically throughout the summer, or seasonally when the algae die in the fall. We also see a shift from the stonefly, mayfly, and caddisfly dominant type streams as algae growth increases to a point where at these higher levels, midges, worms, mollusks, and scuds are generally dominant. Now, if you were to go about trying to identify nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations that would protect streams from growing that excessive amount of algae, how would you go about that? Well, one way to do this is to look at dose-response relationships, and here's an example of that from the Clark Fork River. As you see here, average summer phosphorus increases and correspondingly so does chlorophyll A up to a point where it's saturated. Here, phosphorus is saturated and is no longer having an effect on algal growth. So therefore, you would be looking to set a criterion or a level of protection at this concentration or lower in order to control excess algal growth. You can also consider public perception surveys of what the public wants to see in their rivers and streams. For example, we in Montana and also folks in Utah have carried out surveys of the general public as well as the recreating public on rivers and streams and found that levels of 150 milligrams per square meter are generally acceptable for recreation, but levels above that are clearly not. Similarly, in West Virginia, once you get up to around 25 or so percent algae cover, the proportion of the population that would not like to see that goes up very strongly. And so that's kind of a shift point from their work as well. You can also take a look at the kinds of nutrient concentrations that you see in reference sites. We have at DEQ a network of 186 reference sites around the state, and these being minimally impacted by human effects can represent the natural background concentration of nitrogen and phosphorus in the regions from which they come. So putting all that information together, you can begin to identify regional nutrient concentrations that are protective of stream beneficial uses. So for example, the Middle Rockies ecoregion, this large green area here, it's typically for that region to want to see the concentrations below 30 micrograms TP per liter and 300 micrograms TN per liter. And according to the EPA, 90% of total phosphorus criteria for streams nationally are between 20 and 100 micrograms per liter, for example, which is right in line with what we find in Montana. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.